Star Wars Tabletop Gaming is proudly supported by Gatekeeper Games, your key to gaming unplugged, a tabletop games store offering a friendly atmosphere for people to buy and play their games in the north of Fitzroy.
Welcome to step 3 of episode 15 of Star Wars Tabletop Gaming. This will be the final step for our desert building, this one here, and in this step we're going to paint the building, weather it, and pretty much finish it off. So we'll be going through a few things. The first aspect of painting this piece of terrain will be the spray paint. We'll use spray paint to give it a good base colour. We'll then use a bunch of Games Workshop paints, because that's what I have on hand, to paint some detail of the building. And then lastly, we will use our water-based stain to give a wash to the building, and a few other washes and techniques as well to weather it. So I hope you enjoy, and it helps you with painting your terrain. Let's quickly just go through the paints and the brushes and whatnot and everything that you'll need to paint your desert terrain, or at least what I've been using. So starting off, we'll just need some brushes. I use pretty rough brushes. I'm talking like ones you find in the supermarket or Big W or, you know, at a craft store, children's brushes, stuff like that. And then some kind of old detail brushes that I have lying around. Because it's terrain, you don't need to use excellent brushes here. And subsequently, the water I have in this container, it's the same container I was using for the filler. I wouldn't normally do that for my miniatures. So painting for terrain certainly has different rules to painting for miniatures. And you can be a lot rougher and a lot messier because it's on a bigger scale. The three colors that I'll be using for my base terrain is starting off, we'll use the gloss mocha spray paint there for the brown, and then kind of a gloss cream as highlights, and kind of for the main color of the building, leaving it the brown in the recesses if we can, and then just a very light, quick zenith spray from the top with that Corax white. I'm not using, Corax white is a way too expensive paint to be using on a piece of terrain. However, I don't like regular white paint on any of my miniatures because it's so bright, whereas Corax is a real kind of light grey, I guess, and a lot more subtle, and I think it looks a lot nicer than just spraying white onto the top of these buildings. But, white would do just fine. Or you could just leave with the cream. Do what you want, but those are kind of the colours I'm thinking about. For this piece here, that is the mast, I guess, of my comm station, I'm going to paint it with a base of black and then go over it with a brown and see if that looks good. I'm not sure. I haven't really experimented with the brown yet, but I don't want to just leave it black. I feel like brown would blend in a bit more with the building and with the table as well. So I guess they'd put a protective coating maybe to protect it from the desert over their mast. So you can use any color you want. You could go cream, keep it cream if you wanted to, but nah, I'll differentiate it from the main building because it's made out of a different substance. It's metal, essentially, compared to the mud or the sand of the building itself. Here are the color paints I'm going to be using. You can see quickly there. Those are just for the detail and whatnot, just to add a little bit of interest. I like going over the blacks and the browns with silver. You can see I've done it here on that pipe. Makes it just look a bit worn and like it's been scratched away. And finally, the stain that I'm using is a walnut interior water-based stain. And I'll use that for the building, and I'll use Agrax Earthshade Wash for the detail because that stain, this one here, on plain MDF, doesn't look that wonderful. That's why the filler is super important as well. Alrighty, so that is everything we're going to need to paint our miniatures. In regards to protection, I've put out a old rubbish Christmas-themed tablecloth that I've decided no longer has any purpose. Hi, Napoleon. It's one of my cats. Gotta have two cats. That's normal. So I've used this and I'm just spraying on top of that to protect my garage floor. Do not spray onto your garage floor. Your wife and or parents will kill you. So there we go. That is everything we need. Scanning across. Not too complicated. It's actually a pretty quick process. And I'll show you that as we go.
Here we have the spray painting. So we're starting off with the gloss mocha color, just giving it a really good covering. You can see here, I was just using the cloth before and I'm about to again, because this spray can is leaking. There's kind of little bits of paint going everywhere, which if I was painting miniatures would be a giant pain in the butt. But, you know, when it's, $4 or $7 a bottle and we're just painting buildings, that's fine. So I'm moving around. The spray technique that I'm using is kind of spurts, quick spurts, moving constantly, you don't want to build up paint in any one area. So you certainly don't want to hold the paint can still and hold down the nozzle. That's pretty much the worst thing you can do. So with the building all covered in the brown, I then move on to a black base coat for the antenna. Now the reason I'm doing a matte black base coat is because I didn't know how the gloss brown would go on to plastic, so I decided to do a black first, just to give it a good covering later. I've quickly taken off the roofs. I've realized I didn't spray inside. I should have done it without the roofs on in the first place. And I've sprayed the inside of the buildings in brown as well. You want a good covering inside and out. I don't actually do the insides in cream. You'll see later on. I like to leave them brown. Now doing the dark brown gloss covering on the antenna here. Just moving around it. Once again, you can see I'm using those spurt techniques rather than holding down the nozzle. I held it down a little there. Okay, I take it back. I'll take it back. But just moving around and giving it a really good covering, making sure you're not getting buildups of paint in any one area. Now, I flipped the building upside down, spraying it from underneath, and that's because those bits of details actually mean that when you're doing it straight on from the top, you're not going to get underneath those bits of details, and it will look shoddy. So, toss it upside down and spray it brown again, just to get those areas. Now for the cream. So you can see here I'm being a lot less liberal with the paint, just little spurts, and from zenith as well, from a zenith point of view, or angle I guess. I don't even know if that's the right word, but either way from the top down on an angle, about 45 degrees, and not spraying too much. I want to leave the brown in the recesses, I want to leave the brown at the base of the building, I want to leave the brown inside the building for the most part, so just moving around and doing it from about a 45-degree angle. Once I've done the whole building, it looks like this. So you can see the brown kind of still coming through over most of the piece of terrain, really. It's only really near those top edges that the cream completely takes over, which I think looks much better than going hard with the cream. And now using the Corax White, just to do a quick spray from the top to add a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? Gradient of color. You could go a little harder with white than I did if you were that way inclined. All in all, it's up to you, depending on what colors you're painting with, whether it be a gray scheme, a brown cream scheme like I've done here, or whatever. Those are the kind of techniques you're looking for to achieve that really simple and easy gradient. It's pretty rough, but it looks better than nothing. I've now decided I'm going to paint the antenna mast with a bit of a gradient as well, just using that mocha color again to paint the top, angling down. Makes it look a little more interesting, a little more different. Flat colors, long areas and wide areas of flat colors never look great in any kind of, whether it's buildings or miniatures. So just using the mocha here to get a bit of a gradient and a bit more interesting colors going on with the mast. And the spray painting is complete. So if you have a look, using those just 5 colors, the black there just providing a base, we've given a bit of depth and a bit of gradient, albeit very kind of rough compared to what you could achieve with an airbrush, to our pieces of terrain. So if you have a look there, it's a lot whiter, kind of in the top area, down through cream, down into brown, kind of in those recesses. And that's what we're looking for. And as we put in the wash and the stain, that'll kind of look even better. So I'm putting it around. I did miss. You would have seen I went upside down. I didn't quite get under that that piece of detail just here, but that's all right. It'll be fine. So have a look around, same. Brighter on the top, darker on the bottom, and that's really what you're going for. And you achieve that just by doing little spurts of spray paint and doing your spray painting from a gradient instead of straight on. Same here, it goes from light brown kind of down to dark. I don't know if I like that. It's a bit spotty in the middle, obviously, because we're not using an airbrush, we're using spray paint, and it's a lot more coarse with the paint that comes out. But I don't know, makes it look a little more interesting. I don't hate it. Certainly at a distance, it looks absolutely fine. So there we go. The next step is to get in there with smaller brushes and our paints over here and add some color to the details on the pieces. I've started off using, I think it's the Steel Legion Drab color to paint the base of the courtyard here. In some of the other buildings, I've used Talon Sand as the base, just to mix it up so they don't all look the same. Up to you whether you want to do that or you want them all to look the same. But either way, just painting in amongst the sand, getting a really good covering, and you will have to go over that probably once or twice. I'm not watering down the paints as much as I would with a miniature when working with terrain, because I want it to be thick. I don't really care about the details much. It doesn't matter. But you're just getting in there and making sure you're getting a really good covering. I'm now using the rhinox hide to paint the door. I think it gives it that really cool kind of dark brown metal look. I've made a tiny little mistake there. I don't think I even bother going over it, nor do you really need to, because once you start washing things and putting on stain, it doesn't really matter those tiny mistakes. It just adds more flavor to the building. But if you really don't like it, noting that you can't go back over it with a spray can, just find a bit of a cream or really light brown colored paint and just fill it in. And once the stain's on, you will not be able to notice. So the colors that I'm using here, you can see they're mostly kind of browns and cream colors. That's because I kind of wanted it to keep that desert theme going. I didn't want any bright contrasting colors on any of the terrain. I'll leave that to the miniatures so they can contrast and stand out. You don't want your terrain to be the center of your game and the center of your battle. You just want it to be in the background, adding flavor, adding some interest. I'm using a lighter brown here. You can see I've filled in the bars with rhinox hide as well there. And just moving around, making sure I get a good covering. I do near the end go over all of these again because the paint seeps into the MDF, and because it's just the plain MDF that we're painting at the moment, not the filler. The paint does kind of seep in and it doesn't go on for the first time fantastically. Just be aware to go around again before you start washing. Doing the latter, so grey, I've chosen to use a grey and brown scheme pretty much predominantly throughout all of my buildings, and the grey is to resemble those more metal pieces. With the windows, you can see I've done some brown, I've done some grey. Mix it up, keep it fresh, do different colours. You don't want all the windows looking the same, because that's not very interesting. Make sure when you're painting that you are getting deep into those recesses to make sure the cream is disappearing on those bars especially. They're not the easiest things to paint, but I think they look really cool, and they certainly look really Star Warsy. Here's the vent. So the vent, I've gone for that lighter brown colour again. Nothing too complicated. Getting on the inside, turning the piece of terrain around. Don't be afraid to pick it up, move it around to get to those hard to reach areas. And here's what I was talking about. So now I just go back over most of the colours to make sure that it's a really good covering. You could water this second layer down a little more if you wanted to, but it doesn't really matter. Look, if I was painting miniatures, I'd be using a wet palette, all kinds of things. But terrain, buildings, you can be rough, you can be fast. These paints, for the most part, are old. They've been ruined in various other ways, so I'm not too worried or too stressed. Same with the brushes. We are now finished with our details. So, as you can see, pretty covered, but not perfect, because it just doesn't matter that much once we start washing and staining things. Leave it there so we don't have resolution issues. There we go. Done. Super simple, not difficult. Colors that match in with the theme, nothing that pops too much. Now it is time for washing and staining. Incorrect. My mistake. The washing and staining will not begin yet. First, I want to add some paint and some detail to our mast here. So you'll see that little that black scratching away there. That's when I jammed it back into that piece of MDF, and it will not come back out. The paint that I'd put on both pieces made it a little thicker, but that's just given us an opportunity to do some damage to the piece, because why not? Get creative. So I filled in those little black areas with a bit of silver just to make it look damaged. Same. I've grabbed my lead belcher and put it on the top of that piece as well, that little sprinkler nozzle bit at the top that I've put on all my buildings just because that can be silver as well. Next, I've grabbed one of the sponges that I was using to do the filler with after I've given it a very good wash, dabbed it in some Eshin Grey and dabbed a bit off so it's not too heavy on the sponge, and kind of then just very lightly dabbed it around the antenna to add a bit of damage to it, make it look interesting. Battle damage, or not battle damage in this case, I guess weathering. Looks fantastic. Once again, breaks up those flat colors, which I was talking about before, because flat colors aren't fantastic. So that is the antenna all damaged up. Now we get to the washing. So the only wash I actually use is Agrax Earthshade. First starting, getting it deep into the recesses of all that sand in that courtyard. And then, yeah, there we go, get it deep in. And then moving on to all of the pieces of details. Don't be afraid to go heavy, get it around the edges. You can get it on some of the filler. That's just fine. As you're going, you'll see that it pools near the bottom there. When you go too heavy, just make sure you're wiping that up. A wash does not look good when you leave it dry in a pooled area. So that is all of the pieces of detail that I hit. There's the finishing up on the vent there. You'll see that I get it underneath the vent as well. That doesn't matter because you're going to stain the entire thing. So whatever. In between the ladder, I didn't manage to get filler in there because it's too small a bit and I didn't want to ruin the detail. So I've used the wash to get in there because that's the plain MDF. And now just going around and collecting up those pooled areas and spreading them around because it doesn't look too good if you don't. I then move on to the mast and give that a good wash all over. This was a little tricky because it's plastic, so I had to keep kind of brushing it around, moving it around, so it didn't either pull or run, especially because of the gloss type of paint that's on there. Bit of a challenge, but the wash will still go on and it will still look good. You've just got to work a little harder to get it there. And then moving into the recesses of that antenna, I went really heavy in these bits here because I feel like dirt and grime would collect. And that's what you're trying to achieve with your weathering. You're trying to think, where would dirt and grime and sand and the blasting of sandstorms, for instance, what impact would that have on my building, and what do I want to do to my building to resemble that? So always keep that in mind if you're moving around. Look for those recesses where you get some wash, just washing the top there as well, and go heavier in those recesses and lighter on the non-recesses. Alrighty, moving on. Now it is time to show you how to do the stain. So the stain's interesting. So obviously that's way too heavy. So you put it on initially and then you wipe it off. And that's about as simple as it is, focusing on those kind of textured areas, making sure you get the stain deep into those and then wiping it off. And that's how it looks. I think it looks pretty good. It's super easy. I then put some water onto the cloth that I was using to wipe it off, so it wiped off a little more. I recommend that. Wiping off with a dry cloth, not as easy. So you brush it on. Don't go too heavy, don't go too light. It's a technique. You'll get there eventually with a bit of practice. And then wipe it off, leaving it in the recesses, as mentioned before, and leaving it in those textured bits. Using a dabbing and wiping effect, bit of a combination, and making sure you're getting into all the areas. Now just showing you quickly how that looks on the flat of the building. You want to make sure when you're doing the building, you get the top areas, you get those inside roof areas, you get underneath, in amongst the detail. It's all about just being as thorough as you can. Finally, I did the walls. I did the walls last, so it gave me a spot to hold as I was moving around the miniature. The piece of terrain. Damn, I said I wasn't going to do it for this video, and I did. But I leave the insides. I don't bother doing the insides. If the roofs actually do come off during the game, that's fine. Someone just keeps the inside really clean. Well done to whoever's house this is. And we're all finished, except for getting into those recesses and those corners. Almost completed, so we're almost there. This is post the washing and the staining. Let's just have a sneaky look around. So this is a little dirtier than my original model, but that's fine. Different buildings can have different dirt amounts, just like I'm sure they do in real life. The occupants of this building just haven't given it a good hose down recently. So that all depends on how long you leave the stain on for, how deep you go, kind of even the indents that I've made, how deep they are. That all contributes to kind of how dirty it's going to look after you stain it. All there's left to do now is to do some highlights on the sand and maybe some highlights, or at least kind of weathering on these little individual pieces of detail, and then our building's pretty much complete. I won't show you them because they're pretty simple, but I'll do them and then I'll show you the finished product. We have finished. We have finished our building. Step 3 is complete. We've done the painting, we've done the washing, we've done the staining, we've done the weathering. It's all looking really good. So in that last step there, I just used a bit of talon sand and a bit of Carrick stone to do a bit of dry brushing on the sand, just to make it stand out from the base there. And then I grabbed some lead belcher and I went around the edges of all the detail bits and just put little bits of silver around the edge. You'll be able to see on the bars there. I've already done it to the mast. I went a little harder on the ladder because that'd be worn from people climbing up and down it. A little more subtle on those pieces. Yeah, there as well. Nice and subtle, but it makes it look like they're metal, essentially, that have been kind of painted over with protective coverings or whatnot, as opposed to just random bits that you've painted. Gives it some realism. So that is all finished. Our desert building. As you can see, there's a few steps to it, but all of them are nice and simple, and it means you can go from something that looks like that, MDF with little bits attached, to something that looks like that, and that looks absolutely excellent on the table. Here we have them on the table. So I've just collected the buildings that I've put together and painted so far. I've chucked them on my desert mat, which is actually from Teo Battlefield Essentials, which is an Australian producer. Friends of the channel, check out their YouTube and their Facebook. But either way, so I've put them all on. I think they're starting to look good. I think once we get the bigger buildings done and painted and on the table, some scatter terrain, maybe some rock formations, this little town's going to look really good. So that's the one we just did. As you can see, it's a little dirtier than the others, probably because I went a little harder with the filler and a little harder with the detail and texturing. But that's alright, they can all be different. There's nothing wrong with that. So there you have it, a small desert town, easy to make, simple to get the products for. Hopefully you've enjoyed this demonstration and tutorial. It's given you some hints and some tips. Until next time, may the Force be with you.